She was an experienced outdoorswoman, the kind of person who seemed more at home in the wilderness than within four walls. She loved the crisp air of mountain mornings, the whisper of pines swaying in the wind, and the loyal companionship of her dog, Ace, who never left her side. To her friends, she was reliable, steady, and always prepared. She was not someone who took careless risks. And yet, on a cold October day in 2018, Connie Johnson vanished into the rugged wilderness of Idaho. Vanished so completely that to this day, no one knows what happened to her. What would you do if the trail you trusted turned against you? If the forest that felt like home suddenly became a maze with no way out? Connie Johnson's story isn't just another missing person case. It is a chilling mystery wrapped in contradictions. She was experienced, careful, and accompanied by a dog who would later be found alive. But she herself was gone, swallowed by silence, leaving behind only questions, theories, and a family's endless grief. This is not the story of someone who wandered unprepared into the wilderness. Connie was no novice. She knew the rules of survival. She knew the land. And that makes her disappearance one of the most haunting mysteries to ever come out of the American wilderness. The story begins in early October of 2018, deep in the Salmon Challis National Forest, a place both breathtaking and unforgiving. Stretching across millions of acres, it is a land of towering peaks, winding rivers, steep ridges, and valleys where the sun disappears early in the day. It's the kind of terrain where you can walk for hours without seeing another soul. To some, it's paradise. To others, it's a labyrinth of danger. For Connie Johnson, it was where she worked, where she thrived, and ultimately, where she vanished. Her last assignment wasn't unusual for her. She had been hired as a camp cook for a hunting party. Cooking in the wild, living among hunters, and navigating rough terrain was something she had done many times before. She brought along her beloved dog Ace, a border collie mix who rarely left her side. Together, they made the wilderness their home, even when that wilderness turned harsh. But on October 5, 2018, the routine turned into the unthinkable. At some point during that day, Connie and Ace disappeared. The hunter she had been working with assumed she might have gone off for a walk, as she often did with Ace. She was known for taking short hikes in the mornings or evenings, stretching her legs after long days at camp. But when hours passed and Connie didn't return, unease began to set in. Darkness fell, and with it, the temperature dropped sharply. Still no Connie, no Ace. The camp, once filled with the usual sounds of crackling firewood and laughter, grew tense. The next morning, when she still hadn't returned, alarm turned into fear. Something was wrong, very wrong. The wilderness is vast, and time is unforgiving in the mountains. Every lost hour could mean the difference between life and death. A call was made, and the search began. But before we move deeper into what happened next, let's pause here. Because it's important to understand this. Disappearances in the wild are not unheard of. People get lost. They miscalculate distances, get caught in bad weather, or fall victim to accidents. But this case is different. Why? Because days later, when hope was beginning to thin, searchers stumbled upon a clue, one that only deepened the mystery. Ace, the loyal dog who vanished with Connie, was found alive. Thin, shaken, but alive. And yet, Connie herself was nowhere to be found. Imagine that for a moment. A dog survives the wilderness alone, but the woman who loved him, who fed him, protected him, and relied on him, is simply gone. How could that be? Did Ace leave her behind when something happened? Did she send him away to save him? Or was there something far more sinister at play? This is where the story takes its sharpest turn, because the discovery of Ace did not solve the mystery. It made it deeper. The forest had given back the dog, but kept its silence about the woman. For those who searched, the questions were relentless. Was Connie still out there, injured but alive, waiting for rescue? Had she fallen somewhere so remote that no one could reach her? Or had something else happened, something darker, something no one wanted to admit? Her disappearance would launch one of the largest searches in Idaho's history. Helicopters, Drones, search and rescue teams, and volunteers covered miles of dangerous terrain. They combed through forests, ridges, and valleys. They shouted her name into the vast emptiness, their voices echoing back without an answer. But despite the immense effort, Connie Johnson remained missing. The wilderness kept it secret. And this is the mystery we are about to unravel. Who was Connie Johnson? How could an experienced hiker vanish without a trace? Why was her dog Ace found alive, but she was never seen again? And what theories could possibly explain such a baffling case? Stay with this story, because every twist brings new questions. Every answer opens new doubts. And by the end, you will be left with the same haunting thought that still lingers over this case. How does someone disappear so completely in a place they knew so well, leaving only silence behind? The trail didn't just swallow Connie Johnson. It swallowed the truth. Before a disappearance becomes a mystery, it is first a life. And Connie Johnson's life was one that seemed destined to intersect with the wilderness. She was born with a love for the outdoors, the kind of person who never feared the silence of tall trees or the solitude of open skies. Where others saw isolation, she saw freedom. Where others heard danger in the howling wind and rustling underbrush, she heard music. To Connie, the wilderness wasn't a place to escape from. It was a place to return to again and again. Friends described her as independent, strong-willed, and endlessly curious. She wasn't one to be intimidated by challenges. She lived modestly, but her wealth was in experiences. Campfires under star-studded skies, long hikes across unforgiving ridges, mornings when frost sparkled on the ground like crushed glass. These were the things she lived for. Yet for all her independence, Connie was not a loner. She had a warm, approachable presence, the kind of person who listened when others spoke, who made people feel heard. Her smile carried kindness, but it was also tinged with determination. She had known hardships in life, but she didn't let them define her. Instead, she chose to keep moving forward, step after step, trail after trail. Then there was Ace. Ace wasn't just a dog. He was her companion, her partner in every journey. A border collie mix, sharp-eyed and endlessly loyal, Ace went wherever Connie went. On trails, he darted ahead, ears pricked, always coming back to check on her. At camp, he curled up by her side, a living shield against the dark. Anyone who knew Connie knew Ace was never far behind. Their bond was unshakable, forged through countless miles of wilderness shared between them. And this is what makes her story all the more haunting. Connie Johnson was not careless, nor was she inexperienced. She knew the rules of the wild. She knew the dangers. And she had Ace, a companion whose instincts often served as an early warning system. If anyone was prepared for the wilderness, it was Connie. By 2018, she was no stranger to living and working in rugged terrain. She had taken jobs as a camp cook for hunting trips, work that demanded stamina, resourcefulness, and grit. Cooking in an outdoor kitchen meant hauling supplies through rough terrain, starting fires in rain or snow, and preparing hearty meals in conditions far from comfortable. But Connie did it without complaint. For her, it wasn't just a job. It was a way to live close to the land she loved. Her assignment that autumn took her deep into Idaho's Salmon Challis National Forest. It was familiar territory for her, steep ridges, dense forests, and valleys that seemed to stretch forever. It was the kind of place where only the most self-reliant thrived. And Connie thrived there. She felt at home. But even for someone like Connie, the wilderness was never without risk. She knew this. Anyone who spends time in places like that does. A single misstep can lead to disaster. A change in weather can turn a safe trail into a deadly trap. A wrong turn can spiral into a maze where every direction feels the same. And yet, those who knew her insist. Connie wasn't the type to wander recklessly. She was careful, deliberate, always mindful of her surroundings. If she left camp for a walk, she knew her bearings. If she carried Ace along, she had her loyal safeguard. So how could someone like her, someone so capable, so cautious, disappears so completely? That's the question that has haunted everyone who knew her. Her friends would later say that Connie's disappearance was more than shocking. It was unthinkable. She was the person you counted on when others got into trouble. She was the steady hand, the voice of reason, the one who stayed calm when others panicked. If anyone could survive in the wilderness, it was her. Which makes her vanishing act feel almost impossible. Imagine being in her friend's shoes. You know, someone who seems almost inseparable from the land, someone who has walked more miles of trails than you can count. Then suddenly, she is gone. No footprints, no gear, no trace, just silence. And when Ace was found alive, wandering without her, it was like the wilderness had mocked them all. To understand Connie's disappearance, you first have to understand Connie herself, a woman defined by her resilience, her love for the outdoors, and her unbreakable bond with her dog. This wasn't just a case of an unlucky hiker. This was the vanishing of someone who belonged out there, someone who had built her life around those mountains. Which leaves us with a question more unsettling than any other. If the wilderness could claim even her, what chance does anyone else have? But perhaps the truth isn't as simple as nature reclaiming one of its own. Perhaps something else happened. Something beyond the reach of ordinary explanations. Because as we turn now to the place where it all began, the camp, the forest, the trail, we find that this case isn't just about a woman who went missing. It's about a wilderness that swallowed her whole, and a loyal dog who came back carrying only silence. The Salmon Chalice National Forest in Idaho is one of the largest stretches of untamed land in the United States. Millions of acres of rugged terrain where nature still rules without compromise. It's a place of breathtaking beauty, with jagged peaks that cut into the sky and valleys so deep they seem to swallow the light. Rivers carve their way through granite, forests crowd the slopes, and trails twist and vanish into shadow. To some, it's paradise. To others, it's a place of isolation, a reminder of just how small and fragile a human being can be against the vastness of nature. This is where Connie Johnson worked. This is where she lived. And this is where she disappeared. In early October, the forest carries a deceptive calm. The air is crisp, the mornings glitter with frost, and the mountains seem peaceful under the pale autumn sun. But beneath that surface lies danger. Weather changes without warning. Snow can fall early, bearing trails. Temperatures drop sharply at night, testing even the most prepared camper. One misstep on the loose shale of a ridge can send a person tumbling into a ravine where no one would ever find them. It is here, in this vast and merciless landscape, that Connie Johnson took her last known steps. Her camp was set in the Big Fog Mountain area, remote and difficult to reach. Hunters who hired her relied on her meals to sustain them through long days in the wilderness. For Connie, this was routine. She had cooked in camps like this before, living days or weeks at a time far removed from towns, roads, or comforts of civilization. Imagine the scene: a campfire crackling in the chill air, the scent of pine and wood smoke mingling, the hunters preparing their gear, Ace lying by Connie's side, ears flicking at every sound in the dark. Around them, nothing but wilderness in every direction. No houses, no roads, no passing strangers, just the endless sweep of mountains and trees. It was, in many ways, the perfect place for someone like Connie. But it was also the perfect place to vanish. The trail leading from camp twisted into dense forest. Tall pines blocked the sun, casting long shadows that deepened as the day wore on. In those woods, sound travels strangely. A shout can echo in unexpected directions. Footsteps disappear in soft earth. It is easy to get turned around, to walk in circles without realizing it. Even seasoned hikers sometimes find themselves disoriented in forests like these. But Connie was seasoned. She knew better than to lose her bearings. And still, on October 5th, something happened. Sometime that day, she left the camp. Some accounts suggest she may have gone for a walk with Ace. Others say she was last seen near camp, going about her usual tasks. But at some point, Connie and Ace stepped beyond the safety of camp, and neither returned that night. The hunters assumed at first there was no reason for concern. Maybe she had gone scouting. Maybe she would come back before dark. But as the sun sank behind the ridges and the cold crept in, unease spread. This was not like Connie. She wasn't reckless, and she wouldn't stay gone without letting someone know. By morning, fear had replaced unease. Something was wrong. Very wrong. What happened between Connie leaving camp and the moment she was declared missing is a stretch of time that remains unaccounted for. It is the heart of the mystery. Did she step off the trail and into danger? Did she encounter something unexpected in those woods? Or did the wilderness itself, with all its hidden risks, claim her silently, leaving behind no trace? When searchers later combed the forest, they would describe it as both overwhelming and frustrating. The terrain was steep, the vegetation thick. A person could be only 100 yards away and remain invisible. Every ridge led to another. Every valley looked the same. Helicopters flew overhead, their blades chopping the air, but from above the land stretched endlessly. Miles upon miles where a single figure could vanish forever. And here lies the most chilling part. Despite all the eyes scouring the land, despite the drones and the trained dogs, no clear trace of Connie was ever found. No footprints, no discarded gear, no clothing, nothing. It was as if the forest had closed over her the moment she stepped into it. That's the paradox of places like the Salmon Chalice. They are both stunning and merciless. They give life and beauty, but they also hide danger in every shadow. For centuries, people have gone missing in places like this, swallowed by the land that refuses to yield answers. Connie Johnson's case is only one of many, but the details make hers unforgettable. Because when the wilderness did give something back, it wasn't Connie. It was Ace. And the survival of Ace raises a question that haunts every theory about what happened on that trail. If Connie had simply fallen or lost her way, why wasn't Ace with her? Why wasn't he found beside her, loyal to the end? Why was he discovered alive, days later, wandering alone, as though he had been cut loose from his partner? The wilderness keeps its secrets well. But in the case of Connie Johnson, those secrets sting sharper, because this wasn't a woman who walked in unprepared. This wasn't a hiker out her depth. This was someone who knew the risks, respected the land, and still vanished without a trace. And so the stage is set. The camp, the trail, the forest. A woman who knew her way around all three. A loyal dog who returned without her. In a search that would grow into one of the largest in Idaho's history. But before the search began, there was first the dread. The creeping realization among those hunters, waiting by the fire, that something unthinkable had happened. Connie Johnson had gone into the wilderness. The wilderness had answered with silence. October 5th, 2018. At first, it began like any other day at camp. The hunters rose early, the air cold enough that their breath puffed white in the dawn. The fire hissed and crackled, coffee boiled in tin pots, and Connie Johnson went about her morning routine. Quiet, steady, efficient. This was her element. She moved around the camp like someone who belonged there. The hunters left for the day's trek, rifles slung over their shoulders, while Connie stayed behind with Ace. That was the last time they would ever see her. When the hunters returned at dusk, the campfire was dark. No smell of food greeted them. No cheerful voice asked how their day had gone. The camp was still, eerily so. Connie was gone. At first, they thought little of it. Perhaps she had taken Ace for a walk. Perhaps she was gathering wood or checking on something nearby. After all, this was Connie's world. If anyone could handle herself in the wilderness, it was her. But as the shadows lengthened and night fell hard over the mountains, unease settled in. Connie had never failed to be there when they came back. She wasn't careless. She knew the rules of the wild. Never stray too far. Never let dusk catch you unprepared. And yet, she was nowhere to be found. The hunters searched the immediate area, calling her name into the dark. Their voices echoed through the trees, unanswered. Ace's bark, so familiar, so distinctive, did not ring back. By morning, Their unease had turned to fear. This was no simple delay. Something was wrong. They scoured the camp for clues. Her belongings were still there. Her gear, her supplies, her personal items. Nothing appeared to be missing. Nothing to suggest she had packed up or left of her own accord. She had simply vanished into the wilderness. The hunters reported her disappearance quickly, and soon after, authorities were alerted. Within hours, the search began. The official timeline would later record it like this. October 5th, Connie Johnson was last seen alive at the hunters' camp. October 6th, she failed to return, triggering concern. October 7th, authorities launched a full-scale search. But those bare facts don't capture the unsettling reality of those hours. Imagine it. One moment, a person is going about their day in a remote but safe camp. The next, they're gone. Without sound, without struggle, without trace. What happened in that gap of time remains one of the great mysteries of the case. Did Connie wander from camp for a short walk, only to become disoriented? Did she suffer an injury that prevented her return? Did she encounter something, or someone, in those woods? The strangest element is Ace. Loyal, trained, and deeply bonded with Connie, he never returned to camp that night. If Connie had been close by, Ace would have been there. If Connie had fallen, Ace likely would have stayed with her. But he was gone too, leading many to wonder, whatever pulled Connie away from safety, did it also take Ace? Days later, searchers would find Ace alive, wandering miles from camp. Thin, tired, but alive. And that survival only deepened the questions. If Ace survived, where had he been? Why wasn't he with Connie? Theories swirled quickly among the search teams. Some suggested she might have tried to follow the hunter's trail, losing her bearings in the thick forest. Others wondered if she had pursued Ace when he ran off, leading her farther than intended into dangerous terrain. But others couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary disappearance. The way she had vanished, leaving behind her belongings, with no footprints, no signs of struggle, no clear trail, felt too abrupt, too clean. The hunters who knew her best said the same thing. This wasn't like Connie. She was experienced, careful, prepared. For her to simply disappear didn't add up. And so the search began, not just for a missing woman, but for answers in a place where answers are hard to find. Helicopters swept the mountainsides. Ground teams combed the trails. Dogs sniffed the air for a trace of her scent. For days, the wilderness rang with voices calling her name, but the forest gave nothing back. No sound, no movement, no clue. Just silence. The only break came when Ace was spotted, wandering without his companion. He was quickly rescued, fed, and checked, but he could not tell the story of what had happened. His return raised more questions than it answered. Had Connie gone down one path, while Ace went another? Had she sent him away in a desperate attempt to save him from some unseen danger? Or had something happened so sudden, so final, that Ace fled, instinct carrying him to safety while Connie was left behind? The more they searched, the stranger it seemed. In disappearances, there are usually signs, discarded items, pieces of clothing, broken branches. But in this case, there was nothing. The wilderness had swallowed her whole, leaving only mystery behind. The hunters who had shared camp with her were shaken. They had trusted her, relied on her, lived with her for days. And in an instant, she was gone, without a single clue to guide them. For investigators, the disappearance of Connie Johnson was not just a missing person case. It was a puzzle without pieces. And as the days turned into weeks and the search stretched on, that puzzle only grew more confounding. Because when people vanish in the wilderness, there are usually two outcomes. They're found alive, or they're found dead. But in Connie's case, neither happened. She was simply gone, and in the shadow of that silence, questions began to fester. The news of Connie Johnson's disappearance spread quickly. By the morning of October 7, 2018, it wasn't just the hunters or local deputies looking for her. It was an army. Search and rescue teams, helicopters, dog units, and volunteers from across Idaho and Montana converged on the rugged Selway-Bitterroot Wilderness. The landscape itself was the first enemy. Jagged ridgelines, dense forests, and plunging ravines stretched for miles in every direction. Trails wound unpredictably, and the canopy above often swallowed sound and light. This was a place where even the most seasoned hikers carried compasses and maps, where GPS signals flickered and failed. For the searchers, it felt like looking for a single needle in an endless, shifting haystack. Helicopters hovered above the treeline, their rotors chopping through the crisp autumn air, scanning with heat detection equipment. Ground teams trudged mile after mile, boots sinking into pine needles and loose rock. They called Connie's name until their voices cracked. Some swore they heard faint echoes, but when they pursued them, the forest only answered with silence. Dogs were brought in, their noses trained to pick up even the faintest human scent. At times, a dog would perk up, tugging its handler toward a new direction, sparking hope among the team. But those leads always faded like smoke in the wind. The clock was merciless. Every hour that passed meant colder nights, harsher conditions, and slimmer chances of survival. The wilderness in October was unforgiving. Temperatures dropped sharply at night, and rain swept in without warning. Even with survival training, exposure was a deadly threat. Search coordinators expanded their radius, covering miles of trails, valleys, and hidden gullies. Maps were marked with grids, and teams moved systematically, determined not to miss a single corner. Yet no sign of Connie appeared. Then came the first strange twist. Ace, Connie's loyal dog, was found alive days into the search. Thin, dehydrated, but standing, his eyes alert, his tail wagging weakly when rescuers approached. His survival sparked relief, but also confusion. If Ace had made it back, why hadn't Connie? Some suggested Ace had wandered off on his own, separating from her unintentionally. Others believed he may have stayed with Connie until something forced them apart. Perhaps she had fallen or become incapacitated, sending him away in desperation to find help. But the biggest question loomed heavy. Why was there no trace of her? Normally, searches uncover something: a jacket snagged on a branch, a boot print in the mud, a piece of equipment left behind. But in Connie's case, there was nothing. Her belongings were still neatly arranged back at camp. No trail of items marked her path. Not even Ace's return could point them in the right direction. The search grew into one of the most extensive in Idaho's history. Volunteers poured in, some who had never known Connie but felt compelled to help. Friends and family arrived, refusing to leave until answers were found. Strangers held on a hope, believing that someone as experienced and resourceful as Connie could still be alive, waiting somewhere to be rescued. Helicopters returned day after day, sweeping canyons and ridges. From above, the landscape looked deceptively calm, almost serene. But for those below, trudging through brush and climbing steep inclines, the silence was haunting. Every empty valley reminded them of the stakes. For her loved ones, each passing day was torture. Some clung to hope, picturing her sheltered beneath a makeshift lean-to, waiting patiently for help to arrive. Others feared the worst, that the wilderness had claimed her in a moment of misstep, leaving her hidden beyond reach. Yet there were whispers of another possibility, one that unsettled many. What if this wasn't just a tragic accident? What if something, or someone, had intervened? The absence of evidence made room for theories. Could Connie have met a stranger on the trail? Could foul play be involved? In such a vast wilderness, who would ever know? Still, searchers pressed on, their determination unwavering. They combed every ravine, every creek bed, every stand of trees that could hide a figure. They used drones to map terrain, radios to coordinate, and infrared cameras to scan for body heat. But every lead led to nothing. Every path circled back to emptiness. On the ground, exhaustion set in. Volunteers returned night after night with blisters on their feet and haunted looks in their eyes. Coordinators encouraged them to rest, but many refused. They couldn't stop, not while Connie was still out there. And yet, as the days blurred together, the search began to feel less like a rescue and more like a ritual. They weren't chasing a trail anymore. They were chasing a ghost. By the end of the second week, officials made the difficult decision to scale back the operation. The resources were stretched thin, the terrain too vast, the likelihood of survival shrinking with every sunset. For Connie's family, it was an unbearable blow. Hope was still alive in their hearts, but the official message was clear: the wilderness had won. And yet, in the silence that followed, the questions only grew louder. How could an experienced outdoorswoman vanish without leaving a trace? Why had Ace survived but not Connie? The mountains held their secrets close. And as the official search tapered off, one thing became undeniable. This was no ordinary disappearance. It was a mystery, one that would linger, gnawing at everyone who tried to make sense of it. When official searches fade and the wilderness gives no answers, speculation rushes in to fill the void. Connie Johnson's disappearance was no exception. Friends, family, locals, and even strangers across the country began to ask the same question. How does someone like her vanish into thin air? There were theories, plausible ones, strange ones, and some that blurred the line between the two. The first theory was the most straightforward: disorientation. The wilderness, after all, is merciless. Even the most seasoned outdoorswoman could become turned around in the thick forests of the Selway-Bitterroot. Perhaps Connie had ventured just a little too far, chasing after Ace or looking for firewood, and the landmarks she thought she knew betrayed her. It wouldn't take long. A wrong turn, a path that looked familiar but wasn't, and suddenly the camp was behind her, lost in a maze of trees and ridges. The deeper she went, the harder it would be to find her way back. And with each passing hour, panic could have clouded even her sharp instincts. But if that were the case, searchers wondered, why had no trace of her been found? People who become lost usually leave something behind: footprints in soft soil, broken twigs, articles of clothing shed in desperation. Yet searchers scoured miles of terrain without a single sign. The forest seemed to have swallowed her without leaving a scar. The second theory was injury. Some believed Connie might have suffered a fall, slipped on loose rock, twisted an ankle, or even struck her head. If she were immobilized in a hidden ravine or tucked beneath thick brush, she could have been nearly invisible, even to the trained eyes of rescuers. It would explain why Ace was found alone. Perhaps he had stayed with her for as long as he could, then wandered off in search of food or safety when she didn't rise again. But again, the absence of evidence gnawed at this idea. Not even Ace seemed to lead rescuers back to her location. If she had fallen nearby, why hadn't anyone stumbled across her? Why hadn't Ace lingered in the area until he was found? The third theory was more unsettling: foul play. It was whispered in quiet conversations and posted in online forums. Could someone have crossed paths with Connie in that wilderness? Could a stranger, or even someone closer, have harmed her? The Selway-Bitterroot was vast, but not empty. Hunters, hikers, and others moved through its valleys and ridges. Encounters were possible. Could one of them have turned deadly? Skeptics pointed out that no evidence supported this theory. No signs of struggle were found at camp. Nothing was missing. Connie's disappearance seemed almost too clean, too neat, for foul play. And yet, for some, that very neatness was suspicious. Others suggested she may have left by choice. Was it possible Connie had simply walked away? Those who knew her best dismissed the idea immediately. Connie loved the outdoors, loved her job, and had plans for the future. She wasn't the type to abandon her life, her family, and certainly not Ace. Then there were the stranger theories, the ones that reflected the human need to explain the unexplainable. Some spoke of wild animal encounters, though searchers found no blood, no torn clothing, no signs of attack. Others whispered about hidden dangers in the wilderness: unmarked mine shafts, sudden sinkholes, places where the earth itself could swallow a person whole. And then there were the theories that drifted into the surreal. Online, whispers grew of the so-called missing 411 phenomenon, a collection of mysterious vanishings in remote areas across North America. Some believers suggested patterns, even supernatural elements, that people could disappear into thin air, taken by forces beyond comprehension. For Connie's loved ones, those speculations were both insulting and heartbreaking. To them, she wasn't a case or a theory. She was a sister, a friend, a caretaker of the wild. They wanted real answers, not ghost stories. Still, the reality was undeniable. Every theory had holes. If she was lost, why no trace? If she was injured, why no recovery? If foul play was involved, where was the evidence? And if something else entirely had happened, what could it possibly be? The theories kept people talking, but they offered no comfort. They were puzzles without solutions, shadows without shapes. For investigators, the official stance was cautious. They acknowledged the possibilities, but stuck to the most likely, that Connie had become disoriented or injured and could not make it back. Without evidence of foul play, they could not pursue it as a criminal case. But for those who loved her, that answer was too thin, too unsatisfying. Connie Johnson wasn't just another name on a list of missing persons. She was a woman who had spent her life in nature, who had guided others safely through the wilderness, who had cared for those around her with quiet strength. To accept that she had simply vanished without a trace felt impossible. And so the theories lingered, spoken in hushed tones around campfires, dissected in online threads, debated in kitchens and living rooms. Each person clung to the explanation that made the most sense to them, even if none of them truly made sense at all. In the end, the theories only deepened the mystery. They reminded everyone that the truth was still missing, just like Connie herself. The mountains had not given her back, and until they did, all anyone could do was guess. When the search was scaled back, the forest grew quiet again. The helicopters no longer rattled the skies. The voices calling her name no longer echoed through the valleys. For many, the wilderness returned to what it had always been, remote, still impenetrable. But for Connie's loved ones, nothing was the same. Her family refused to let the silence settle. Flyers with her photo were circulated, showing her warm smile, her kind eyes, and the loyal dog who had survived without her. Her story spread through local news, then in national headlines. Missing woman in the Selway-Bitterroot Wilderness. But to her sister, her friends, her colleagues, she was more than a headline. She was the person who had always been there, steady, dependable, full of quiet strength. The hunters who had shared camp with her were shaken deeply. They replayed every moment of those last days, wondering if they had missed something, if there was a detail they could have seen, a choice they could have made differently. Survivors' guilt weighed heavy on them. They had left her at camp, trusting that she was safe. When they returned, she was gone. That simple fact gnawed at them, night after night. In her hometown, friends gathered for vigils. They lit candles, prayed for her return, and comforted one another through tears. Connie wasn't someone who sought the spotlight, but now her absence cast a shadow that touched everyone who had known her. The emotional toll stretched beyond her family and community. Searchers themselves carried the weight. Many had walked miles of punishing terrain, driven by determination to bring her home. When they came back empty-handed, it wasn't just exhaustion they felt. It was failure. Even though they knew they had done everything possible, the question lingered. Why hadn't they found her? Ace's survival brought bittersweet emotions. Seeing the dog alive sparked hope at first. Hope that Connie, too, was somewhere out there, clinging to life. But as days turned to weeks, Ace became a living reminder of unanswered questions. He had been with her. He had seen what happened, yet he could not tell them. His return was proof that survival was possible, and at the same time, proof that she had not come back with him. Her disappearance became a wound that refused to heal. Families of the missing often describe a unique kind of grief, one without closure. It isn't the finality of death, nor the peace of resolution. It's a suspended state, a haunting limbo where hope and despair live side by side. For Connie's loved ones, Each new day was a battle between those forces. Some mornings, hope won. Maybe today, a hiker would stumble upon a clue. Maybe today, someone would remember something that could reopen the case. Other mornings, despair crept in. What if they never knew? What if she was gone forever, hidden in the silence of the mountains? The hunters carried their own torment. Around campfires, they admitted to one another that they sometimes felt her presence, as though the forest itself remembered. Each creak of a tree branch, each echo of the wind, seemed to whisper her name. For the broader community, her disappearance became a cautionary tale. People spoke of her with reverence and sorrow, a reminder that even the most experienced could fall victim to the wilderness. Her story was told to new hikers, not as gossip, but as a warning. Respect the wild, for it gives nothing back easily. And yet, alongside grief, there was frustration. How could such a massive search, with so many resources, yield nothing? How could helicopters, drones, dogs, and hundreds of people fail to locate even a single trace? For many, it didn't just feel like a tragedy, it felt like an injustice. Her family pushed for answers, but none came. Months turned into years, and the case remained open, but stagnant. Connie Johnson was still listed as missing, her fate unresolved. Each holiday, each birthday, was marked by absence. The empty chair at the table was a constant reminder of a life interrupted. The hardest part was the not knowing. Families can endure great pain, but uncertainty is its own kind of torment. It gnaws at the edges of every memory, every attempt to move forward. For those who loved Connie, closure was denied. And so, they held on to what they could. The memories of her laugh, the warmth she brought to others, the image of her walking through the woods with Ace at her side. The wilderness had taken her, but it had not taken who she was. That, they carried forward. Yet the question lingered in every quiet moment. What really happened out there? Years passed, but the name Connie Johnson never faded from the minds of those who had known her, or those who had only come to know her through her disappearance. In the Selway-Bitterroot Wilderness, hunters still whispered her story as they set up campfires. Hikers who ventured onto the trails sometimes paused, remembering the woman who had vanished without a trace. To the unknowing, the mountains seemed timeless and untouched. But to those who remembered, the silence carried weight, a reminder that even beauty could be unforgiving. Her case became one of those haunting mysteries that linger in local lore. Newspapers revisited it on anniversaries. Online forums speculated endlessly, with strangers combing through every detail, every timeline, every rumor. Some insisted she must have slipped and fallen into terrain too treacherous to reach. Others clung to darker explanations, certain that foul play had hidden her fate forever. But no matter the theory, the truth remained locked within the wilderness itself. For her family, Connie's legacy was not her disappearance, but her life. They spoke of her love for the outdoors, her quiet confidence, her generosity of spirit. They remembered how she had guided others through the wilderness, ensuring they were safe, comfortable, and cared for. To them, she wasn't a mystery to be solved. She was a sister, a friend, a woman who had given her heart to the wild. And yet, they could not escape the shadow of uncertainty. Every phone call brought a flicker of hope that maybe, finally, someone had found something. Every news story about a body discovered in the region reopened the wound, only to end in disappointment when it wasn't her. Connie's story also became part of a larger, unsettling pattern. Across North America, countless people had vanished in national parks and remote wilderness areas, often under similarly baffling circumstances. Most were eventually explained: falls, exposure, accidents, but some, like Connie, remained unsolved. Her case was often mentioned in connection with these other disappearances, feeding into books, documentaries, and debates about the dangers of the wild. Some placed her among the so-called missing 411 cases, a collection of vanishings that seemed to defy logic. While skeptics dismissed such connections as coincidence, others found the parallels chilling. Why did some people disappear without leaving a single trace, while others were found quickly? Why did experienced outdoorsmen and women sometimes meet fates that seemed impossible? For many, Connie's case symbolized the wilderness at its most mysterious. It reminded people that the wild is not a place that can ever be fully controlled or understood. It is vast, unpredictable, and at times merciless. But for those closest to her, the mystery was deeply personal. They didn't care about theories or statistics. They cared about the woman they had lost. They cared about the hole left in their lives. Still, her disappearance carried a legacy. It brought awareness to the risks of venturing into remote areas, even for those with experience. Search and rescue groups often referenced her case when training new volunteers, reminding them that not every mystery ends with answers. Her name became a caution, a story told not to scare, but to instill respect for the land. Yet, within that legacy was also resilience. Those who knew Connie refused to let her memory be defined by the day she vanished. They celebrated her life, her kindness, and the countless ways she had touched others. They remembered her walking confidently through the trees, Ace at her side, a figure who belonged to the wilderness in a way few others did. And Ace, the dog who returned when Connie did not, became part of that legacy. To many, he symbolized loyalty, survival, and the enduring bond between a woman and her companion. His survival was bittersweet, a small light in a story filled with shadows. In the end, Connie Johnson's disappearance became more than just a case file. It was a story of a life lived close to nature, a story of loss, and a story of questions that may never be answered. The wilderness had claimed her, but it had also immortalized her. Every time her name was spoken, every time her story was retold, Connie's presence lingered. And though the mountains kept their secrets, her memory remained. A reminder that behind every unsolved disappearance is not just a mystery, but a person, a life, a legacy. The Selway-Bitterroot Wilderness remains unchanged. The rivers still cut through the valleys, the winds still sweep through the tall pines, and the mountains still rise, silent and eternal. On the surface, nothing is different. Yet for those who remember Connie Johnson, the land carries a silence that feels heavier than before. Years have passed, and still, the question lingers. What happened to Connie and Ace on that trail? Some believe the answer lies in the simplest explanation, that she wandered too far, stumbled into danger, and never recovered. Others argue that something more sinister unfolded. Perhaps someone crossed her path that day. Perhaps she was not alone in the wilderness after all. But no matter how many theories are shared, or how many debates unfold, one truth remains: no one knows. The story of Connie Johnson is not just about a disappearance. It is about the fragility of certainty in the face of the unknown. One moment, a person can be laughing with friends, walking confidently into the trees. The next, they are gone, as though swallowed by the earth itself. The searchers who combed those mountains still remember the feeling of helplessness, the way days blurred together, the way hope flickered like a candle against the wind. Some admitted later that the wilderness itself felt alive, as if it were holding its secrets close, unwilling to surrender them. And perhaps that is what unsettles us most. The idea that in a world filled with satellites, cell towers, and endless technology, a single person can still vanish, completely, irretrievably. For Connie's family and friends, the wound remains. They carry her absence with them every day. Each unanswered phone call, each anniversary, each quiet night, when memories return uninvited, they feel the weight of what they lost. Yet they also carry her spirit. They remember her laughter, her warmth, her strength. They remember the woman who gave her life to the wilderness, who chose the trail not because it was safe, but because it was where she belonged. And Ace, the loyal dog who returned when she did not, remains etched into the story as a living paradox. He survived, he made it back, and in doing so, he raised even more questions. How did he endure? Why did he come back alone? Did he know what happened in those woods? Only he could answer. and he could not speak. Today, when people retell Connie Johnson's story, they do so with reverence. It is a cautionary tale, yes, but also a testament to the power of nature, the fragility of human life, and the mysteries that still dwell beyond the reach of answers. Some mysteries, it seems, are not meant to be solved. The wilderness keeps its secrets, and yet, as long as her story is remembered, Connie Johnson has not vanished entirely. Her legacy endures in the whispers of the wind across the mountains, in the footprints left on forgotten trails, and in the hearts of those who continue to wonder. What happened to Connie Johnson and her dog Ace on that September day? The truth remains hidden, but the questions remain. And maybe, just maybe, that is the most haunting part of all.